The United States Navy operates 11 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, and each one of these floating cities displaces over 100,000 tons and carries more aircraft than most countries have in their entire air force. And here's what makes this completely insane, because the rest of the world combined operates a total of maybe 10 aircraft carriers. And most of those are smaller conventional ships that can't match American capabilities. And we're talking about a technological and numerical gap so massive that the U.S. Navy could fight every other navy on Earth simultaneously and would still have significant advantages. And the crazy part is that this dominance isn't new or temporary, because America has controlled the world's oceans continuously since 1945, which is almost 80 years of unbroken maritime supremacy. And during that time, dozens of countries have tried to challenge this dominance, including the Soviet Union, with its massive submarine fleet, and China, with its recent naval expansion. And none of them have even come close to breaking American control. And the question nobody really asks is why? Because having more ships doesn't fully explain it, since China actually has more total vessels than the U.S. Navy. And the answer involves 7 specific mechanisms that work together to create a level of naval power that's essentially unassailable. And when you understand these 7 reasons, you'll see that American ocean control isn't just about current capabilities. It's locked in for decades into the future, regardless of what other countries do. And the first reason is something that changed naval warfare forever. And it's the decision to make every major American warship nuclear-powered, which sounds like a technical detail, but actually creates advantages so enormous that conventional navies can't compete. And here's why this matters. Because a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier can operate for 25 years without refueling and can steam at maximum speed indefinitely without worrying about fuel consumption. And this means American carrier groups can deploy anywhere in the world and stay on station for months without needing supply ships to bring fuel. And compare this to conventional carriers like the ones Britain or France or China operate, because those ships need to refuel every few days when operating at high speed, and this requires a whole fleet of tanker ships following them around and limits their operational range and means they spend significant time traveling to and from fuel depots. And the practical impact is staggering, because American carriers can respond to crises in hours rather than days, and can maintain continuous presence in critical areas like the Persian Gulf or South China Sea, and can operate in regions where there are no friendly ports for resupply. And beyond carriers, this nuclear advantage extends to submarines, because the entire American submarine fleet is nuclear-powered, with CVOMs carrying ballistic missiles and about 50 attack submarines. And these boats can stay submerged for months at a time, limited only by food supplies, and can travel at high speeds underwater indefinitely. And compare this to the diesel-electric submarines that most countries operate, which have to surface or snorkel every few days to recharge batteries and are much slower when submerged. And the result is that American submarines are essentially undetectable, because they never have to surface and can patrol vast areas of ocean and can respond to threats anywhere. And here's the strategic implication, because nuclear propulsion means the U.S. Navy isn't dependent on fuel supply lines that could be attacked in a war, and can operate globally, even if cut off from support. And this was a deliberate choice made in the 1950s, when Admiral Hyman Rickover pushed for nuclear propulsion against significant opposition. And that decision created a permanent advantage that compounds every year, because nuclear technology is extremely difficult and expensive to master, and even wealthy countries struggle to build and maintain nuclear vessels. And the second reason is what really separates American naval power from everyone else. And it's the carrier-centric doctrine that puts aviation at the center of naval warfare, while other countries still think of carriers as supporting ships for surface fleets. And here's how this changed everything, because the United States recognized earlier than anyone that aircraft carriers are the capital ships of modern navies, the same way battleships were in the early 20th century. And this realization came from World War II, when American carriers defeated the Japanese Navy in battles where the opposing ships never even saw each other. And since then, the U.S. has built its entire fleet around carrier battle groups, where the carrier is the centerpiece and every other ship exists to protect it and enable its operations. and each American carrier can launch and recover aircraft continuously day and night in almost any weather and carries about 75 aircraft, including FA-18 fighters and E-2 Hawkeye early warning planes and EA-18G electronic warfare aircraft and helicopters, and this air wing can strike targets 500 miles away and control airspace for hundreds of miles around the carrier and provide surveillance and reconnaissance across enormous areas. And think about what this means strategically, because a single American carrier battle group controls more ocean than most countries' entire navies, because the combat radius of the aircraft extends the effective range of the ship, and no surface vessel can get within 500 miles without being detected and likely destroyed. And compare this to how other countries use carriers, because the British Queen Elizabeth class carries maybe 40 aircraft, and the Chinese carriers carry even fewer. And most of these are shorter-range fighters without the supporting aircraft for early warning and electronic warfare. And this limits their effective combat range and makes them vulnerable to submarines and anti-ship missiles. And here's the force multiplication effect, because 11 American carriers means the U.S. can have 3 or 4 deployed globally at any time with others in maintenance or training. And this provides continuous coverage of critical regions. And during crises, the Navy can surge 6 or more carriers to a specific area, and this represents more naval aviation power than existed in the entire world in World War II, concentrated in one place, and no other country can even imagine doing something similar. And the third reason is something that operates invisibly, but makes American naval dominance nearly impossible to challenge, and it's the undersea warfare capability built around attack submarines that are so quiet and so capable that they can sink any surface ship in the world before being detected. And here's why this creates an asymmetric advantage, because the United States operates about 50 Los Angeles and Virginia class attack submarines, and these boats are designed for one primary mission, which is killing other ships and submarines, and they're equipped with torpedoes and cruise missiles and can operate in shallow coastal waters or deep ocean. And the critical factor is quietness, because American submarines use advanced propulsion systems and sound dampening technology that makes them almost undetectable by enemy sonar. And this means they can get close to enemy ships and launch weapons before the enemy knows they're there. And the kill probability is essentially 100%, because modern torpedoes are guided weapons that home in on their targets, and surface ships have almost no defense against a submarine attack. And think about what this means for naval warfare, because it makes surface ships incredibly vulnerable unless they have extensive anti-submarine protection. And the United States is the only country with the capability to provide that protection at scale through a combination of attack submarines and anti-submarine helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft and sophisticated sonar systems. And this creates a situation where American surface ships can operate safely because they're protected by layers of anti-submarine warfare, but enemy surface ships are vulnerable because they lack equivalent protection. And here's the strategic impact, because this underwater dominance means that in any naval conflict, American submarines would sink enemy carriers and destroyers and supply ships. And those losses would be catastrophic, because modern warships take years to build and cost billions of dollars, and losing even a few would devastate a navy. And the United States demonstrated this capability in World War II, when American submarines sank over 60% of Japanese merchant shipping and most of the Japanese Navy. And that campaign essentially strangled Japan's war economy. And the same capability exists today, but with technology that's generations more advanced, and no country has figured out how to counter it effectively. And the fourth reason is what makes American naval power sustainable over decades. And it's the global base structure that provides support and logistics and repair facilities on every ocean. And this network took 70 years to build and cannot be replicated quickly. And here's how this works, because the United States maintains major naval bases in Japan and Bahrain and Italy and Spain and Diego Garcia and Guam and South Korea. And these aren't just ports where ships can visit. They're complete support facilities with dry docks and parts inventories and maintenance crews and fuel storage and weapons, magazines. And this means American ships can deploy globally and receive full support anywhere they operate. And when a ship needs repairs, it doesn't have to return to the United States. It can pull into Yokosuka or Naples or Bahrain and get fixed. And the turnaround time is days instead of months. And compare this to other navies, because even China, with its recent expansion, has almost no overseas bases. And when Chinese ships deploy to distant waters, they operate alone without support infrastructure. And if something breaks or they need parts or ammunition, they have to return to China, which might mean weeks of transit time. And this limits how long they can stay deployed and how far from home they can operate effectively. And here's the force multiplication effect, because American forward bases allow what's called rotational deployment, where ships based in the United States can rotate through forward areas and always maintain presence. And for example, there are always one or two carrier groups in the Western Pacific based out of Japan, and there's always a carrier in the Persian Gulf operating from Bahrain, and this continuous presence is possible only because of the base structure that supports it. And beyond the military advantage, there's also the economic aspect, because these bases require host nation agreements, and the United States has maintained these agreements for decades through a combination of security guarantees and economic benefits and political relationships. And this diplomatic foundation would take any rival decades to build, even if they had the resources. And the fifth reason is something that seems almost unfair, and it's the decades of operational experience that the U.S. Navy has accumulated through constant deployments and exercises and actual combat operations. And this creates a knowledge base and institutional competence that cannot be purchased or copied. And here's why experience matters so much in naval operations, because operating a modern warship is incredibly complex and requires thousands of people working together in precise coordination, and launching aircraft from a carrier involves split-second timing with dozens of people on the flight deck, and damage control requires training to fight fires and flooding while keeping the ship operational, and navigation in contested waters requires understanding of currents and threats and tactics. And the United States Navy does this constantly, with ships deployed somewhere in the world every single day, and conducting exercises that simulate combat conditions and actually fighting in conflicts from the Gulf War to Libya to Yemen. And this means American sailors and officers have experience that's measured in decades of continuous operations. And compare this to the Chinese Navy, which has expanded rapidly, but whose sailors and officers have almost zero combat experience and have only been operating carriers for about 10 years. And/or the Russian Navy, which does occasional deployments but spends most of its time in port due to maintenance issues and budget constraints. And here's the practical impact, because in naval warfare, small differences in crew competence create huge differences in effectiveness, and an experienced crew can launch aircraft faster and detect threats sooner and respond to damage more effectively and fight their ship better than an inexperienced crew. And American carrier crews can launch and recover aircraft simultaneously in conditions that would shut down operations on other carriers. And American submarine crews can track multiple targets and maintain stealth in shallow water. And American destroyer crews can coordinate air defense across multiple ships. And these capabilities come only from thousands of hours of practice, and the institutional knowledge is embedded in training programs and procedures and officer development systems. And this means each new generation of American naval personnel starts with the accumulated knowledge of previous generations. And the sixth reason is what really explains the technology gap, and it's the American defense industrial base that designs and builds naval systems. And this industry exists at a scale and sophistication that no other country can match. And here's how this creates compounding advantages. Because the United States has multiple companies competing to build ships and weapons and sensors, and each company employs thousands of engineers and operates advanced facilities and has decades of experience, and companies like Huntington Ingalls and General Dynamics build carriers and submarines, and Raytheon and Lockheed Martin build missiles and sensors. And these companies don't just build what the Navy asks for, they invest in research and development of next-generation capabilities. And this creates a constant innovation cycle where new technologies are developed and tested and integrated into ships. And think about what this means practically, because American destroyers have the Aegis combat system, which can track hundreds of targets simultaneously and engage multiple threats. And this system has been continuously upgraded for 30 years and is now in its 5th generation, and no other country has anything comparable. And American carriers use electromagnetic catapults to launch aircraft, which allows higher launch rates and less stress on airframes. And this technology took 15 years to develop and only recently became operational. And American submarines use pump jet propulsion and advanced sonars. And these technologies represent billions in development costs and decades of research. And here's why this matters strategically. Because the technology gap is widening, not narrowing, because American defense companies are developing sixth-generation capabilities, while other countries are still trying to match fourth-generation American systems, and the investment required to close this gap would be enormous and would take decades. And even then, success isn't guaranteed, because defense technology development is extremely difficult, and most programs fail or run over budget. And the United States has been doing this successfully for 70 years, and has institutions and processes and expertise that took generations to build. And the seventh and final reason brings everything together, and it's the strategic geography of the United States, which is protected by two massive oceans and has no hostile neighbors. And this allows the Navy to project power globally without worrying about defending the homeland. And here's why this creates such an overwhelming advantage. Because American naval bases on the east and west coasts are completely secure from attack, and ships can be built and maintained and loaded with weapons and supplies without any risk of enemy action. And compare this to potential adversaries, because China has all its naval bases on its coast, which would be vulnerable to attack in a war. And Russia has its fleet divided between 4 separate fleets that can't support each other because they're separated by geography. And European navies operate from small countries where bases are close to potential threats. And this geographic protection means the entire American naval construction and support infrastructure is invulnerable, and during a conflict, American shipyards could work at full capacity building and repairing ships while enemy yards would likely be under attack. And American submarine bases could generate constant patrols, while enemy bases might be blockaded or bombed. And here's the force multiplication effect. Because this secure homeland allows the United States to build a navy optimized purely for power projection rather than homeland defense, and every American carrier and submarine and destroyer is designed to fight far from American waters. And this is only possible because geography provides security. And compare this to China, which has to worry about American submarines operating near its coast, and Russia, which has to defend multiple maritime approaches, and even Britain, which is an island but is close to potential threats. And the American geographic advantage allowed the strategy of forward presence, where the Navy maintains ships continuously deployed in critical regions rather than surging from home ports during crises. And when you combine all 7 of these reasons together, you see why American naval dominance is so overwhelming and so sustainable. Because nuclear propulsion provides unlimited range and endurance, and carrier-centric doctrine extends control across vast ocean areas. And submarine warfare capability makes enemy surface fleets vulnerable, and global bases enable sustained forward presence, and operational experience creates competence that can't be quickly copied. And the defense industrial base generates continuous technological advancement, and strategic geography provides a secure foundation that can't be threatened. And these 7 mechanisms reinforce each other in ways that make the advantage self-sustaining. Because technological superiority attracts more funding, which enables better ships, which provide more operational experience, which informs the next generation of technology. And geographic security allows forward basing, which enables continuous presence, which generates experience and deters challenges. And the result is a navy that doesn't just control the oceans, it dominates them so completely that no other country or combination of countries has any realistic prospect of challenging that control. And the United States could lose half its carriers tomorrow and would still have more effective naval power than the rest of the world combined. And this dominance is locked in for decades, because the ships being built now will operate until 2060, and the technologies being developed now will define naval warfare until 2080. And no other country is even on a trajectory to match these capabilities, because they would need to match all 7 advantages simultaneously. And that would require nuclear propulsion expertise that takes decades to develop, and carrier operational experience that requires constant practice, and submarine capabilities that demand advanced technology, and a global base network that requires diplomatic relationships, and an industrial base that needs sustained investment and strategic geography that cannot be changed. And this is why the American Navy controls all the oceans and will continue to do so for the foreseeable future.